In this family, I don't have a name, I only have a function. They call me Gilly when they need another glass of wine on the rocks, and they call me Gillian when I accidentally char the edges of the mashed potatoes their golden boy loves so much. For 33 years, I've been so busy playing the backdrop to Adrian's spotlight that I forgot I'm the one actually paying for the electricity to keep his stage lit. As a technical writer, my entire professional life is built on translating chaos into clarity, distilling complex jargon into seamless user experiences. I am the invisible hand that guides you through a crisis, the one who writes the 500-page manual for a system you ignore until it stops working. I can document a Bleach API integration without a single syntax error. But in the humid, salt-slicked air of my parents' Sarasota beach house, my skill doesn't mean clarity. It means I'm the one expected to provide the standard operating procedures for every whim they have, without ever being credited as the author. I stood in the kitchen, the overhead fan wobbling in a way that suggested it might eventually give up and collapse into the sink. Outside the Gulf of Mexico was a flat, shimmering sheet of turquoise, beautiful and indifferent. Inside, I was drowning in a sea of grocery lists and prep schedules. Every holiday since I was 13 years old has had the same rhythm, the rhythmic shuck-shuck of the vegetable peeler, the smell of bleach on my hands, and the distant sound of laughter coming from the porch where Adrian sat, being adored. Even as children, the roles were cast in stone. I was the one assigned to scrubbing the grout lines in the bathroom with a toothbrush, while Adrian was the guest of honor for simply existing. He was the one who got to lick the frosting bowl while I was already washing the beaters. He was the star, a title given to him for his golden curls and his ability to look charming while doing absolutely nothing. I was the background noise, the hum of the refrigerator that everyone relies on but no one notices until it stops working. We are 5 years apart in age, and light years apart in reality. At 33, I am self-made. I put myself through school while working 3 jobs. I bought my own apartment in a complex where the elevators actually work and the neighbors don't know my business. I have a 401k and a retirement plan. Adrian is 28, handsome in that way that makes people want to hand him things for free, and currently finding himself in the wreckage of a flailing modeling career. He lives in a state of permanent adolescence, funded by the bank of mom and dad, yet he remains the family's pride and joy. I am the daughter who is stable, which in this house is just a polite word for dull enough to be used. The leaves hadn't even begun to turn elsewhere when the directive came down from the mountain a month ago. Mom decided to host Thanksgiving in Sarasota. She didn't ask. She announced. The guest list hit 13, an unlucky number for anyone else, but for me, it was a mathematical nightmare. It included the inner circle and the extended relatives, people I hadn't seen in years and who likely wouldn't remember my name until they needed a refill on their sweet tea. Every single decision, the 4 p.m. dinner time, the island casual dress code that necessitated everyone wearing linen that would inevitably wrinkle, the menu that leaned heavily into Adrian's preferences revolved around him. Adrian likes heritage turkeys because he read an article about flavor profiles. Adrian hates cranberry sauce from a can because the ridges offend his aesthetic. Adrian wants white truffle oil in the flavor. Potatoes, because he thinks it makes him sound sophisticated. The logistics and organization, that was on me. And of course, the quality had to be Michelin star caliber while the budget remained at the mercy of my own wallet. The days leading up to today were a blur of fluorescent lights and the mechanical hum of refrigeration. I handled the massive grocery haul at Publix, navigating the aisles like a soldier in a war zone, filling 3 carts with organic produce, heavy cream, and enough butter to clog the arteries of a small nation. I hauled the bags into the trunk in the sweltering Florida heat, the sweat prickling at the back of my neck. I was in the middle of staging the appetizers, meticulously arranging the shrimp cocktail on a bed of shaved ice when my father walked in. He looked refreshed, smelling of expensive sunscreen and the gin and tonic he'd been nursing since noon. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, his grip heavy and self-congratulatory. "Gilly, you're the best we've got when it comes to the kitchen and pulling a party together," he said, his voice booming with a false joviality that made my teeth ache. "Don't know what we'd do without our little engine." It sounded like a compliment, but it felt like a life sentence. It was the verbal equivalent of a pat on the head given to a loyal golden retriever. Good girl. Now go fetch the beer. I had tried, weeks ago, to suggest a different path. I had sat at the dining table with my mother, my laptop open to a list of local catering companies that specialized in holiday meals. I showed her the prices, the reviews, the sheer relief it would provide. Mom, it's 13 people. If we hire a small crew, just 2 people to help with the prep and the cleanup, we could actually sit down and enjoy the day together. I could even pay for half of it. She didn't even look at the screen. She was busy scrolling through her own social media feed, likely looking for tablescape inspiration she would expect me to recreate. She looked up at me then, her eyes narrowing into 2 sharp, icy slits. It was a look that could kill a conversation at 40 paces. "Jillian, don't be so selfish," she said, her voice dropping into that low vibrato heavy register she used when she wanted me to feel like a monster. "Don't you have any consideration for your brother? Adrian is at a delicate stage in his career. If those strangers were to snap a candid photo of him while he's relaxing, or worse, see him helping with the cleaning, the high society bohemian image he's been cultivating would be ruined. We cannot expose these private moments to hired help." I nearly spat out my water. "Mom, Adrian just shot for a discount clearance catalog. He's not dodging Vogue paparazzi. No one cares whether he eats turkey with his hands or a fork." Immediately, her gaze turned sharp and jagged, as if I had just committed a sacrilege, chilling the words right in my throat. Adrian stepped closer then, resting a hand on my shoulder, his voice thick with honeyed manipulation. "Sis, I know you're looking out for me, and I know you're tired. But Mom's right, this house is the only place I can truly be myself without being scrutinized. Besides, you're the best at these logistics, aren't you?" It was always the same. My mother with her demands, my brother with his endless delusions. I just wanted the night to end on schedule. So, I went to Publix. I started the brine for the turkey. I had spent 6 hours yesterday chopping, sautéing, and organizing the flow of a kitchen that wasn't mine, for a family that viewed me as a utility. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long bruised shadows across the kitchen floor, the first of the guests began to arrive. I could hear the front door opening and closing, the high-pitched squeals of greeting, the clink of ice in glasses. The house was filling up with people who would eat the food I labored over, sit in the chairs I had dusted, and compliment the wonderful atmosphere that my mother would take full credit for creating. I looked at the heritage turkey, still submerged in the depths of an oversized bucket of herbal brine. I would lift it out now to air-dry a necessary prelude to tomorrow morning, when its skin would finally be slicked in a glistening coat of herb-infused butter. My back throbbed with a dull, insistent ache. I looked at the function I was expected to perform, and for the first time in 33 years, the mask of the reliable daughter felt dangerously close to cracking. "I am the small print in the terms of service, the part everyone agrees to use but no one ever bothers to read until they want to sue you for everything you're worth." Thanksgiving Day didn't arrive with a sunrise. It arrived with the sound of a doorbell that felt like a localized earthquake. By 10 in the morning, the Sarasota heat was already beginning to lean against the windows, a heavy, humid hand pressing against the glass, but inside, the air conditioning was cranked down to a crisp, artificial 68 degrees. It was the kind of cold that didn't feel fresh. It felt expensive and stagnant. I had been awake since 5, moving through the kitchen with the mechanical precision of a clockwork doll. My apron was already smeared with a streak of flour, and my hair, which I'd tried to style into something festive, was beginning to succumb to the steam rising from the industrial-sized pots on the stove. The house filled up quickly. The silence of the morning was replaced by the cacophony of holiday cheer, the sharp clink of ice and crystal, the rustle of silk and linen, and the performative laughter that always precedes a family meal. Everyone showed up in high spirits, their faces glowing with the ease of people who have spent their morning relaxing, completely oblivious to the fact that the floor they were walking on had been scrubbed by my hands only hours before. Aunt Madison was among the first to corner me. She was draped in a flowery caftan, smelling of expensive lilies and gin. As I emerged from the kitchen carrying a massive silver tray of Publix shrimp cocktail arranged in a precise, spiraling tower on a mountain of crushed ice, she greeted me with a slight, involuntary crinkle of her nose. "Oh, Jillian, honey," she remarked, her smile tight and pitying. She leaned in, not to hug me, but to inspect the tray. "You smell just like a clove of garlic butter. It's so earthy, so industrious of you to handle all this yourself." I managed a tight nod, the muscles in my neck feeling like overwound wires. Industrious, a word for ants and pack mules. I set the tray down on the sideboard, the ice shifting with the soft, sliding sound. I wanted to tell her that the earthy scent was the result of 3 pounds of hand-peeled garlic for the herb butter, a task that had left my cuticles raw, but she had already turned away to find Adrian. Adrian was, predictably, the sun around which the entire room orbited. He was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater entirely too heavy for Florida, but perfect for the fall in the Hamptons look he was cultivating. He stood in the center of the living room, holding a glass of sparkling cider like it was a scepter, regaling a group of cousins with stories of a photo shoot he'd done in a warehouse in Brooklyn. "All right, everyone, photo time," Mom chirped, clapping her hands. She was in full director mode, her eyes darting around to ensure the lighting was hitting the sofa just right. "Before we lose the light on the patio, Adrian, darling, front and center." The family drifted toward the glass doors like iron filings to a magnet. Adrian took his place dead center, the focal point of the universe, his jawline angled perfectly to catch the afternoon glow. Dad stood to his left, beaming with the pride of a man who believed he had personally engineered his son's bone structure. The aunts, the uncles, and the cousins filled in the gaps, a tapestry of successful, smiling people. I was still in the kitchen, frantically clearing the prep stations, my hands wet and smelling of sea salt and cocktail sauce. I wiped them on a dish towel and hurried toward the patio, hoping to slip into the edge of the frame. "Jillian, wait," Mom said, not looking at me but at the screen of her phone. "The shrimp tray is looking a bit messy. Could you just go back and rearrange the lemon wedges? We want the background of the house to look perfect." By the time I straightened the lemons and made it back to the doorway, the shutter had clicked. The official family photo was complete. I caught a glimpse of the screen later, a sea of happy faces, perfectly balanced, with Adrian as the golden anchor. I wasn't even on the periphery. I was the ghost in the machine, the person who made the room possible but wasn't allowed to occupy it. The turnout today was larger than the logistics I'd planned for. My cousin Lucy had brought along a new boyfriend, a tall, quiet man named Cedar, who looked as overwhelmed as I felt. As the group migrated toward the dining room, the inevitable happened. We ran out of upholstered chairs, 13 chairs for 14 people. My mother paused, her finger tapping against her chin as she surveyed the seating chart she'd spent 3 days obsessing over. She didn't look at me with apology, she looked at me with a solution. "Gilly, honey, go grab that old plastic chair from the laundry room," she said, her voice breezy and dismissive. "We can just squeeze it into the gap between Aunt May and Lucy. They're both so petite they won't mind a bit of a crowd. It's actually perfect, since you'll be up and down with the platters all evening anyway. It's much more practical for you to be right there on the edge where you can jump up easily." The practical chair was a sun-bleached, cracked piece of patio furniture. I brought it in, the legs scraping across the tile with a sound like a scream. I squeezed it into the narrow gap between Aunt May and Lucy. Both she and Cedar offered a constant stream of apologies, but I waved them off. It wasn't their fault. They had given my mother a week's notice, but apparently, she had been too deeply entrenched in the critical business of choosing napkin colors to think of passing the word along to me. Everyone settled in. The room filled with the clatter of silverware and the smell of the brined heritage turkey. I sat on my plastic throne, my knees drawn in and legs pressed together, yielding to the cramped and limited legroom. I stared down at the platter of deviled eggs resting directly before me. They were beautiful. Each one was sprinkled with a dusting of smoked paprika that looked like red velvet. I had spent nearly an hour peeling them under cold running water, my fingers cramping, ensuring that each white was glossy and flawless. My mother considers a deviled egg with an imperfect white, a single nick, or a jagged edge to be an absolute travesty that has no business on a serving platter. I looked at the 20 perfect eggs, and then I looked at the blurred reflection of myself caught in the glass door of my mother's display case. I was flawless, too, at least in my execution of her demands. I had smoothed over every nick, hidden every jagged edge of my own resentment, and presented a white that was beyond reproach. I sat in the kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of my own labor, realizing that the only thing more transparent than my mother's travesty was the daughter who prevented it. The dining room erupted into the kind of rhythmic, practiced applause that usually follows a mediocre Broadway performance. I could see the chandelier, a sprawling, crystalline monstrosity Mom called coastal chic, vibrating slightly from the force of the laughter. The feast had officially begun, and with it, the premiere of the annual Adrian highlight reel. I stepped up to the kitchen island, my hands trembling slightly as I lifted the heavy ceramic bowl of mashed potatoes. This wasn't just a side dish, it was a testament to endurance. I had whipped these potatoes to my mother's exact standards of fluffiness, a texture she once described as the physical embodiment of a summer cloud. To achieve it, I'd had to pass the hot tubers through a ricer twice, then beat them by hand with a wooden spoon until my bicep felt like it was being scorched by a blowtorch, and then Mom's voice trilled, rising above the clink of silverware like a flute in a high-wind storm. The agent looked at him and said, "Adrian, you don't just wear the clothes. You make the clothes want to be worn. Can you imagine?" A chorus of hollow, polite oohs and ahs followed. I knew the contract she was referring to. It was a one-day shoot for a mid-tier regional catalog, a gig that paid $3,000 before taxes and agency fees. It was the only work Adrian had landed in 4 months, a pittance that wouldn't even cover the rent on his trendy apartment, let alone his taste for artisanal espresso. But in the vacuum of this dining room, under the warm glow of Mom's approval, it was treated like he'd just signed a multi-picture deal with a major studio. $3,000 for a single afternoon, Aunt Madison marveled. I always said those cheekbones were a genetic miracle, but who knew they were such a lucrative investment? Adrian's laugh was soft, effortless, and entirely unearned. It's just about the craft, Madison. Finding the right light, you know? I entered the room then, the mashed potatoes heavy in my arms. The heat from the bowl seeped through my oven mitts, stinging my palms. No one looked up. I was a ghost in a technical writer's skin, a silent provider of the user manual for their celebration. I set the bowl down in its designated spot, precisely 3 inches from the gravy boat, like a perfectly placed footnote, and turned back to the kitchen for the centerpiece. The heritage turkey was a beast. I'd had to pre-order it from an organic farm in the Panhandle a month in advance because Dad had spent an entire Sunday afternoon lecturing me on how factory-farmed birds have no soul. Apparently, for a bird to be worthy of our table, it needed to have lived a life of pastoral luxury before being vacuum-sealed. I had spent the last 4 hours basting it with a compound butter I'd made from scratch rosemary, thyme, and a hint of lemon zest that I'd grated until my knuckles were raw. As I struggled to lift the roasting pan, the weight of the 20-pound bird strained the tendons in my wrists. I moved slowly, my breath shallow, centering my gravity as I navigated the narrow passage between the kitchen island and the dining room door. "I tell you," Dad started, his voice booming with the confidence of a man who has never been told to lower it. "It's all in the delivery, like that one about the golfer and the priest." I didn't even need to be at the table to know exactly what face he was making. He'd be leaning back, his thumbs hooked into his belt loops, his face flushed with the first 2 glasses of wine. He'd deliver the punchline, a joke he'd told every Thanksgiving since 2014, and then he would laugh uproariously at his own wit, giving a self-satisfied wink to whoever was unfortunate enough to be sitting directly across from him. I reached the table and lowered the turkey onto the heavy wooden trivet. The heat rolled off the bird in a savory wave, the skin a perfect mahogany brown. My arms were screaming now, a dull, throbbing ache that radiated from my shoulders down to my fingertips. I stood there for a second, catching my breath, waiting for a thank you, or even a, "that looks great." "Gilly," Dad's voice rang out, sharp and impatient, cutting through his own laughter. "You forgot the serving spoon for this. We can't exactly eat it with our hands, can we?" The table erupted in a fresh wave of chuckles at his wit. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks not from the oven but from the sheer, grinding friction of being treated like a broken appliance. "Coming, Dad," I said, my voice flat. I turned back to the kitchen, the cycle of my evening beginning in earnest. For the next hour, I was a planet orbiting a sun that didn't know I existed. I moved in a blur. Kitchen to dining room to kitchen. Filtered water for Aunt Madison. A clean napkin for 8-year-old Sophia the Lewis's daughter and my cousin's child who had dropped hers on the floor. More wine for Mom. Through it all, Adrian sat enthroned. His hands were interlaced on the tablecloth, his fingers long and manicured hands that had never felt the sting of a scouring pad or the weight of a grocery haul. He looked like a king in his own little realm, nodding graciously as people threw compliments at him like rose petals. He didn't offer to help. He didn't even look toward the kitchen. I caught a glimpse of my mother then. She wasn't eating. She was holding her phone at a precise 45-degree angle, hovering over the table. She was waiting for the moment Adrian picked up the carving knife, a knife I had sharpened myself just this morning. "Wait, wait," she chirped. "Adrian, darling, hold the knife just like that. Look at the camera. Give me that rugged provider look." Adrian complied instantly, his expression shifting into a practiced, smoldering gaze. He held the knife over the turkey I had labored over, the bird I had paid for, the meal I had orchestrated from inception to execution. A moment later, the ping of a notification echoed from my own phone, sitting forgotten on the kitchen counter. Later, I would see the post. It was a photo of Adrian, looking vibrant and heroic with the carving knife in hand. The caption read, "So thankful for the handsomest man in the room for making this dinner so meaningful. A true family treasure. Grateful. Thanksgiving. Our star." There was no mention of the cook, no mention of the logistics. I am the ink in a story where someone else gets to be the protagonist. I am spent and used up just so the page can have something to say. The meal didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a tactical exercise in which I was the only soldier on the field. While the rest of them settled into the rhythmic cadence of the feast, the heavy clink of silver against china, the collective sigh of satisfied appetites, I remained in a state of perpetual motion. It started with the salt, then it was a request for filtered water, then a clean napkin to replace one that had succumbed to a gravy spill. People didn't even look up when they asked. It was a reflex, a pure habit born of 3 decades of "Gilly will get it." I was a vending machine that operated on vocal commands. My hands were so busy running these micro-errands, weaving between the tightly packed chairs, reaching over shoulders, dodging gesticulating hands that I couldn't even get a fork to my own mouth. I looked down at my plate during a rare 3-second window of stillness. It was a beautiful spread, a curated museum of my own labor. But the Brind heritage turkey was no longer glistening. The herb butter had begun to congeal into a dull, opaque film. The potatoes, once a summer cloud, were now a cold, dense mass of starch. My food was stone cold, a silent reproach to the time I'd spent making sure everyone else's was served at the perfect temperature. "Gilly?" Lucy said, her voice cutting through the fog of Adrian's latest anecdote about a casting director. She was the only one who had actually stopped eating to look at me. "Gilly, for heaven's sake, let me help you for a second. Sit down and eat your dinner. You haven't taken a single bite." The table went quiet for a heartbeat. I felt a flicker of something, gratitude, perhaps, or the dangerous sting of being truly seen. I moved toward my plastic chair, my hand reaching for my fork on the counter. "Oh, don't worry about it, Lucy." Mom cut in, her voice breezy and sharp as a razor's edge. She didn't even look away from her wine glass. "Gilly's used to it. She actually loves taking care of everyone. She's like her grandmother. She doesn't feel like the meal has started until everyone else is happy." The sympathetic look Lucy gave me, a wince of shared realization, was the only thing that confirmed I wasn't the crazy one in the room. It was the "she loves it" narrative, the ultimate weapon of the domestic tyrant. If my labor was a choice born of passion, then their exploitation was merely a form of indulgence. I didn't even want the heavy stuff anymore. The turkey and the potatoes felt like lead in the presence of my mother's casual dismissal. I just wanted a serving of the roasted Brussels sprouts. I'd prepared them exactly how I like them, charred just enough to be nutty, tossed with thick-cut bacon and a glaze of dark maple syrup. They were the one thing on the menu I'd made for myself. I reached for the serving dish. My heart sank. The ceramic was streaked with amber syrup and rendered bacon fat. All that remained were a few charred, lonely crumbs and a single wilted leaf. "Oh, they were so good everyone polished them off," Mom chirped, noticing my empty hand. She wiped a corner of her mouth with her silk napkin, looking thoroughly satisfied. "You'll have to make more next time, Gilly. Maybe a double batch?" A lump formed in my throat, thick and jagged, like I'd swallowed a piece of the broken plastic chair I was sitting on. It wasn't just about the sprouts. It was the realization that I could provide everything, and they would leave me with nothing but the grease. The breaking point didn't come with a shout or a grand gesture. It came with a sound. Snap. I looked up. My father was leaning back, his face flushed a deep sunset purple from the wine and the heat of the room. He didn't look at me. He looked toward the kitchen, his arm raised, his fingers executing a sharp, perfunctory snap. "Gilly," he grunted, his eyes fixed on the television in the other room where a football game was muted. "I'm dry. Get me another Bud Light. Make sure it's from the back of the fridge. I need it at that specific sub-zero temperature, pulled one at a time. Maximum refreshment, you know." The snap echoed in the quiet of the room. It was the sound of a master calling a hound. It was the sound of 33 years of Gilly being told exactly where her value ended. I looked at his expectant face, at Adrian's bored profile, at my mother's satisfied smile. I looked at the charred crumbs on the platter. And for the first time in my life, I felt the cold, clear weight of the sub-zero refreshment my father so desperately craved. I stood up. I didn't say a word. I simply smoothed my apron and walked into the kitchen, the sound of the plastic chair legs dragging across the floor serving as my only exit music. The snap of a finger is a small sound, but in the silence of a heart that has finally had enough, it sounds like the breaking of a world. I stood in front of the open refrigerator, the cold air rolling out in a pale, ghostly fog that swirled around my ankles. I reached for the Bud Light at the very back, my fingers brushing against the frigid aluminum. I could feel the maximum refreshment my father demanded, the sub-zero bite that was supposed to earn me a grunt of approval. I didn't take it. I let my hand drop. I stood there for a long moment, the hum of the fridge, the only sound in the kitchen, a stark contrast to the rising tide of laughter and clinking glasses in the next room. They were waiting for their beer. They were waiting for the engine to kick back into gear. My gaze settled on the space above the refrigerator. There it was, the key lime pie. I had made it yesterday, squeezing the tiny, stubborn limes, whisking the sweetened condensed milk and egg yolks into a thick, pale yellow silk. I had baked the graham cracker crust with enough butter to make it snap like a secret. It was a masterpiece of Floridian tradition, tart enough to make you wince and sweet enough to scratch your throat. It was their perfect ending. It was the final note in the symphony of Gilly's service. Slowly, deliberately, I reached for the roll of aluminum foil. The sound of it tearing was a sharp, metallic scream in the quiet kitchen. I wrapped the pie tightly, the foil crinkling under my fingers like the skin of a shed snake. I wasn't putting it away for later. I was taking it. Robbing them of this one final sweetness felt like the only way to balance the ledger of the Brussels sprouts and the plastic chair. I looked at the sink. It was a mountain range of ceramic and stainless steel dirty plates, smeared with gravy, crystal glasses stained with wine, the roasting pan with its blackened bits of heritage turkey. It was a monument to their consumption and my labor. I left it all. I quietly slipped out the back door, the screen door catching on the frame before clicking shut with a finality that echoed in my chest. I didn't go back for my coat. It was hanging on the rack in the foyer, a beige, sensible thing that belonged to the woman who stayed. My purse was already in the car, a habit of a woman who has no need to reapply her lipstick or touch up her powder. The Sarasota air hit me like a physical weight, thick, humid, and smelling of damp earth and the receding tide. It was a heavy heat, but it felt clean compared to the cloying scent of my mother's fake, expensive perfume that had been suffocating me all day. I got into my sedan. The leather seat was warm, almost hot, against my legs. I started the engine, the low growl of the motor sounding like a predatory cat waking up. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't look at the bright, mocking lights of the dining room window. I drove over the dry, sun-baked grass of the lawn, the tires crunching with a satisfying violence, and hit the main road. I slammed on the gas. The car surged forward like a beast escaping a cage. I rolled down the windows, and immediately, the wind rushed in, salty, humid, and loud. It howled in my ears, a chaotic but pure sound that was finally loud enough to drown out my mother's criticisms and Adrian's unearned ego. I took a deep breath, a real one, deep into my lungs. No more roasted turkey, no more of the passive-aggressive silence that passed for conversation. There was only the pungent, wild scent of the Gulf and the smell of burning rubber on asphalt as I pushed the car faster. The wind whipped my hair across my face, stinging my eyes, but I didn't slow down. It felt exhilarating, as if the sheer force of the air were peeling away the skin of Gilly the servant, the backdrop, to reveal the real Gillian underneath. I started to laugh. It was a raw, raspy sound rising up from my throat to compete with the roar of the wind and the dark, blurred silhouettes of the palms lining the road. The road stretched out before me, a black ribbon cutting through the Florida night. Behind me, the holiday house was shrinking into a tiny, insignificant dot of light in the rearview mirror. I was no longer the one paying for the electricity to keep their stage lit. The road doesn't ask for a function, it only asks for a direction, and for once I am the only one behind the wheel. The highway eventually surrendered its emptiness to the garish yellow and blocky black beacon of the Waffle House sign. It stood against the deep Florida night, a promise of late-night calories and unvarnished reality. The moment I shoved the heavy glass door open, the refined, stagnant air conditioning of the Sarasota house was obliterated by a direct, unapologetic assault of scents. Old grease, burnt coffee, a hint of cigarette smoke clinging to someone's jacket, and that sharp, industrial tang of blue cleaner. The lighting was merciless. Harsh fluorescent tubes humming above cast everything in a stark, sickly glare, highlighting every spill on the worn Formica counter and the exhaustion etched on the few faces present. It was the antithesis of my mother's island casual aesthetic. There were no soft filters here, no strategically placed tea lights. This was a place for people who were done performing. Barb, a waitress whose name tag was pinned crookedly on her grease-stained apron, looked up from filling ketchup bottles. She didn't smile, nor did she ask why a woman in a nice silk blouse was entering a diner alone at midnight on Thanksgiving holding a foil-wrapped pie like a stolen treasure. She just nodded a simple acknowledgement that another human soul had crossed her threshold. I took a seat at the empty counter, avoiding a sticky spot near the napkin dispenser. The sudden test of bacon hitting the flat-top grill and the clatter of heavy ceramic plates filled the space, a productive, noisy contrast to the passive-aggressive silence I had left behind. "What can I getcha, sugar?" Barb asked, her voice like gravel over velvet. I didn't have to think. The words were already waiting behind my teeth. "Just coffee, black, and a double order of hash browns, scattered, smothered, and covered." The words felt heavy in my mouth, but they were mine. I wasn't ordering for Adrian's palate or my mother's travesty-free standards. I was ordering for the hollow space in my chest. While I waited, my phone began to vibrate incessantly on the counter. It was a barrage of texts from the family group chat. I caught snippets on the lock screen. "Where are you? Your father is waiting for his beer. You took the pie? Jillian, this is beyond selfish. Adrian is so disappointed. I didn't block them. I didn't engage." I just gently toggled the notifications to silent. The screen went dark, and for the first time in my life, the weight of their expectations felt like a lead coat I had finally stepped out of. When Barb returned with the coffee, I reached for the key lime pie. I unwrapped the foil, the tart, citrusy scent cutting through the grease of the diner. "I made this," I said, sliding the pie toward her. "It's too much for one person. Could you share it with everyone here? It's Thanksgiving after all." Barb looked at the pie, then at me. For a second, the professional mask slipped, and I saw a flash of genuine understanding. She fetched a stack of small plates. I watched as she served slices to the trucker at the end of the counter, the young couple in the corner booth who looked like they were running away from something too, and the cook who was scraping the grill. It was being served to people who were lonely like me, people with no families or nowhere to go on this day of togetherness. It was no longer a function, it was just a pie. I looked into the steam-fogged window of the diner. The Gillian in the reflection was tired. Her hair was a mess of salt wind and humidity, but she was no longer the Gilly who served the table. I took a sip of the bitter, black coffee, felt the lingering sting of the salt air on my face, and I knew that from here on out, I would only cook for people who actually give a damn about me. In the harsh, honest light of a Waffle House, a stolen pie tastes sweeter than any meal served on a bed of lies.